Good morning. We're all awake here, as you can see, busy little beavers. We actually, excuse us, we have a new software that we're working with, so that's why there's been a little bit of delay. I'd like to welcome you this morning to the Regional Services Committee meeting for February 28th and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And also today you'll notice that most of us in different forms of pink today as well. So this is just to acknowledge that Anti-Bullying Day. So just to make a separate day and stand out that this is something that we will not put up with in our communities, and standing up with the people that have been bullied in schools, businesses, and everything else. So thank you for those of you that have participated. And we'll move on now to the approval of the agenda with some changes. We would like to move up UB2 to after correspondence, so C1. After C1, we will be UB2. Then we're changing R7 will be before R1. So those are the two changes, and with those two changes, I'd like an approval of the agenda. It's been moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Moving on now to the adoption of the minutes of the regular regional services January 24th to be adopted. Move.
I have some business arising with that.
Business arising. So we will move to that after you adopt them. After we adopt those. Since seconded? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Business arising from the minutes. Director Kuhn.
Yes. I would like to refer to our item R6 on the previous minutes. It's the report from the CAO regarding the drinking water protection information. As you know, I found out that some of the figures that were presented at previous meetings were not correct. There was some misinformation, and I would like to just elaborate a little bit on that. We were quoted figures for the Nanaimo Regional District. Now, the reason that was done is because in that report that was presented to us, we were comparing what we were going to charge for our water plan compared to the Nanaimo Regional District. Back in that report, we were told that the budget for the Nanaimo Regional District plan was $5 million. And that compared kind of favorably to our 2.45 million. I think that's what was quoted for us. But the 5 million is in essence, it's actually 12 times the actual budget. So it's quite a huge difference. Their budget is $400,000, and they charge a parcel tax of $8 per annum. So that is quite a huge difference of what is proposed for our plan. Now, at the January meeting, we were then presented with a cost or with a quote that the Nanaimo Regional District was charging $50 per 100,000. Now, in my mind, I had accepted the 5 million because I thought, well, it makes sense. The Nanaimo Regional District has more population than we have, so that could possibly be a right figure. But when I heard the $50 per 100,000, I knew that was wrong, because $50 per 100,000 comes to a budget of between 10 and 15 million, and that's a huge budget. And so it would be 30 to 40 times their actual budget in Nanaimo. So I wanted to just elaborate on that, because I found it wrong that we were quoted these vastly exaggerated figures, and also the public was quoted that, and the purpose was obviously to make our proposal look better. On top of that, I attended 3 of the meetings, and at those meetings was also mention made of comparison to the Comox Regional District. And so I had phoned the Comox Regional District as well. And it turns out they don't even charge any taxes. They don't charge a parcel tax or an assessment tax. They recover their costs for their plan by way of bulk water rates. So I don't know why that Comox Regional District was even mentioned. In the report that was presented to us in November, there's a quote, and I read, based on the direction of the board to return with a financial statement, with a financial estimate of those more functional services, the following was undertaken at a high level in comparison to those provided by the Regional District of Nanaimo. As an example, number 1, a review of the RDN watershed function, structure, and budget. Now, if the budget of the Nanaimo Regional District was reviewed, then I would take for granted that we know how whatever errors occurred in the presentation to us and to the public, how those happened. And I'd like to know how that happened. I would like to get a report on that. I would like to get the details of that, because I think those are vastly different figures, and I would like to know how that happened. Thank you.
So you would like more information?
Yes.
And so could you, Director Acton, you have a question?
Yes, question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm wondering if there is some validity of what Director Kuhn is saying, in the sense where there's been some misinformation and some errors made, and looking back, I'm wondering if the process has gone too quickly, that there are errors being made and we're presenting misinformation to the public. So is there a way to kind of bring it back and make sure that we're all talking the same language and understanding the same information? And it's a very complex proposal that doesn't have a lot of meat and potatoes in it for people to grasp, because it's conceptual. So I think maybe just bringing it back and presenting it. And then also, it's partly, in my opinion, it could be done, it's a little backwards. If you were going to, so if you're asking the people for money, if you were going to go to the bank and ask for money, you would have a business plan that clearly states out what you're going to do. And in this case, it's very ambiguous and very conceptual. And so people are making mistakes and not understanding it and presenting possibly misinformation. And I don't want the public to feel like we've misled them. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crothers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to make a recommendation to the committee that has been acknowledged that there was an error in that information. I would prefer to report out to the board. This is obviously a staff issue, and there's a concern with that information that was provided. I've clarified that with the board. I would appreciate, as Director Kuhn said, to provide a report to the board with that. I would also suggest that you will be receiving a report in March as a result of all of the public consultation. All of the financial numbers will be in there, and they will be verified to ensure that we don't have a problem with it. If at that time the committee has a concern with the information that comes forward as a result of the work that we've been doing for the last year and a half, then I would recommend that the committee make that recommendation at that time. But we've done a fair bit of work on this, and we will be reporting out at the March Regional Services Committee meeting. And at that time, the committee can review that information and determine whether they're satisfied with it, whether there needs to be more or more work done. But in the meantime, I would be happy to prepare a report for the board on Mr. Director Kuhn's concerns.
Just wondering if we need a motion to that effect, or just in general. Okay, motion from Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Lefebvre, that a report be prepared.
Yep.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on that report? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on now to public input period. Is there anyone in the gallery that wishes to ask any, well, actually, the purpose of the public input period is to afford an opportunity for the public to provide comment on an agenda item before the board, committee, or commission and considers the item. The purpose of the public input period procedure policy is to recognize the need for the public input period to proceed in a timely fashion. So is there anyone from the gallery that wishes to speak? Come forward to the podium, please. You have a maximum of 15 minutes. 3 minutes. I've got 15. 15 minutes for the, 15 minutes in total. I'm going down my list.
Okay, I won't
Okay.
take 15 minutes.
Okay, good, that's
My
good.
name is Craig Marchenko. I'm a board member with the Cowichan Housing Association and a citizen of the CRVD, or a recent citizen. I've spent more than 30 years in the social and affordable housing sector with the in executive positions with the governments of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Newfoundland. Recently retired as Deputy Minister of Community and Housing for the government of Manitoba, and I'm still currently involved in the housing sector under contracts with the government of BC and the government of Nova Scotia to provide advice and support regarding the national housing strategy. I would like to say that I think that the proposal for the Housing Trust is a very worthwhile item. I believe that local governments need to be involved in housing. All three levels of government have their own particular areas in which they can be involved in providing affordable housing for their citizens. But it's the local government which understands the priorities of their communities. And I think it's important that they invest and that they become involved. The National Housing Strategy, yes, provides billions of dollars over the next 10 years for the development of affordable housing. But just so you know that provincial governments will continue to outspend the federal government in this area. And they all both rely on local governments as the final input in terms of the priorities, in terms of what is built and what is invested in terms of affordable housing in the community. Over time, it has always been nonprofits and cooperatives that have built public housing or supported social housing in their communities. But there is a need for coordination of this delivery. As you know, in the Cowichan Valley and probably elsewhere across Canada, well, I know across Canada, there is thousands of nonprofits. And often it is fractured delivery without any kind of purpose. Each nonprofit generally tends to want to deliver to their niche community. It's very important, and I think the proposal here speaks to the idea of coordination of the delivery of needs within the Cowichan Valley. I think it's also important that local governments invest so that they can have a voice, and a strong voice, in terms of where that provincial and federal government is invested.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good timing. Thank you for your input, and we'll move on. Is there anyone else in the gallery? Seeing none, I'll move on to, we have no delegations. We have correspondence.
Yes, Madam Chair. We have correspondence from the Cowichan Housing Association. This is regarding the affordable housing in the Cowichan region. This is some information for you, and this is for discussion with item UB2. So we wanted to highlight the correspondence, so that's in front of you. And now you can move into UB2.
Thank you very much. Moving to UB2, the back of your pages there.
Which is a report. This is the report from the Senior Planner, Land Use Services regarding affordable housing, Cowichan Housing Association's proposal to establish a regional service. This has been referred from the February 14th Corporate Services Committee meeting, and it's here for Mr. Crothers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Following the previous Regional Services Committee meeting, when the Housing Coalition made their presentation, it was referred subsequently to Corporate Services. At that meeting, at the last Corporate Services meeting, it was determined that there was some clarification required, and so the Housing Coalition has taken the time to put together some clarification to attempt to answer some of the questions that the committee members may have had during the first presentation, and to clarify their ask of the committee. So I recommended that this matter be put forward as unfinished business, and I believe that the representatives are here to speak to their updated information in support of that request.
Okay. So would Terry, would you like to come forward to speak to this? Is it you that will be speaking to it?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, members
Welcome.
of the board. I'm just going to load a PowerPoint presentation that I prepared that covers the written report that you received in your packages. If you'll just bear with me one moment. Being a Mac person, I am just a little bit unfamiliar with slideshow. That would be it. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here again to speak to you. Chris Hall, in January, we presented a proposal for an affordable housing contribution service for the Cowichan region. I also wanted to acknowledge members of the home team here today, Malena Patenode, Michelle Staples, and Cindy Lissay, who are here amidst their very busy lives. Thank you. And a couple of members of the Cowichan Housing Association Board. Just briefly referring back to the proposal that was put before you, that proposal contained 3 components. It was for a housing trust fund in the amount of $500,000, a component for planning research coordination for $138,000, and for fund management and administration, approximately 15% of the total for $112,000. I'm going to speak to each one of these in turn. And again, I just want to remind everyone that, that this proposal comes to you in the context of both the release of the National Housing Strategy and what we know about provincial directions. And since I submitted this report, as you know, the province has released its 2018 budget and its 30-point plan for affordable housing in the province. The feedback and comments that we heard from directors were, can you tell us more about what this fund can actually do? How will it be accessed? How will we ensure that there would be regional equity and that rural areas would benefit from a fund? Is this just about homelessness, or are we talking also about families, seniors, youth, and the missing middle? What actually can we expect to be realized from this fund? And how do those components of coordination and administration benefit and contribute to the big picture? So I'm going to address one of these, each of these in turn, through drilling down into each of those components. So the Housing Trust Fund component of the proposed contribution service, the purpose is to provide seed funding to affordable housing projects. A key focus here, and a key focus throughout this entire proposal, is the ability to leverage partnership funding. So not only would there be seed funding provided, but there would be an emphasis on leveraging funds that would be becoming available from federal and provincial levels of government. And I would add to that absolutely, and of course, we're talking about a spectrum of affordable housing, that we're talking about families with children, lone parents, moms with children and babies, and singles and seniors as well. We clarified also that you know, there are options for a fund such as this, and I'll get into that a little bit later on, to perhaps provide the ability to accept public donations, top up with funds from community amenities, and And there may be a desire not to expend $500,000 each year, but to save up for larger projects. These are options that can be considered. How will the funds be accessed? We have a plan that is going to be released fairly soon from the Cowichan Coalition that is going to outline priorities for addressing homelessness and affordable housing. Out of that plan, there will be a strategic plan developed that will identify priorities over the coming 3 years. Cowichan Housing Association with the Coalition has also proposed to develop an affordable, an attainable housing strategy that would help us to drill down to the level of communities, to look at rural, urban areas and different segments of the population to really identify priorities. So with those two strategies, we foresee that there would be an annual plan and a budget provided to the CVRD each year. That the process would involve a call for proposals, that there would be a very well thought out approval process and criteria to ensure that regional priorities are met. Of course, there would be an annual review, and of course, there would be very well thought out performance monitoring and evaluation, and annual reports each year to the CVRD. To ensure regional priorities are met, the Coalition foresees and is in the process of developing its terms of reference to include an allocations committee, and that should be regionally representative and have input from the board in terms of the representation. So how do we ensure regional equity, and how do we ensure inclusion of all members of the public? We foresee that the strategies will identify regional needs and priorities, including rural areas. We should have a focus on those people who are living in low to moderate income situations. That's where the primary struggles lie, and as I mentioned, including seniors, families with children, youth, and those living in situations where they're not able to afford adequate housing. Project criteria, again, to be developed and confirmed with the CVRD, but we foresee that including, does this proposal meet the priority needs identified in the population that needs to be addressed? Does it address regional equity? What is the leveraging potential of this particular proposal? What partnerships are involved? What is the capacity of the organization? And how does the proposal meet accountability criteria, and what support does this have from the community? You asked what would the potential benefits of a fund like this be? And of course, because we don't have it, we can't analyze it and provide you with those metrics. But we do have examples from 2 neighboring regions that we can draw upon to say this could be the potential. This is the experience of other communities. The CRD, as you know, has a very well developed housing corporation and housing first program. And they've been doing this for a long time. It's a bit difficult to compare ourselves to them, but we can only aspire. The CRD has been issuing capital grants of $5,000 to $15,000 per unit. Part of their criteria is that projects must demonstrate that the funds can leverage a minimum of $5. And at last count, when I looked, the funds were leveraging actually an average of 15 to 1. This example came out of a presentation by the housing manager of the CRD to the CVRD board. The CRD has invested over $10 million. They've created well over 700 units of affordable housing. They've also entered into a Housing First partnership with BC Housing and Island Health. Comox Regional District to our north, a little bit different again, a little bit smaller, but still another regional district that has managed to develop an affordable housing service. Each year, they present a 5-year plan to their board. They can accept public donations with tax receipts, and the CVRD can top up the budget with funds contributed. Their progress, they've just gotten started. I think in 2015 their service was approved, and so they're just starting their process of getting affordable housing developed. You asked what could be our return on investment? What are some of the examples of how this is going to save us money in the long term? Well, the first thing is that we know that housing is an economic development engine. And so we drew upon some research from BC Housing that estimated a social return on investment of 1 to 2. So for every dollar invested, between $2 and $3 in direct social and economic value is created. In terms of Housing First, which is a very important component of developing affordable housing and something that the Coalition is very interested in moving forward, we see that getting people into affordable housing saves a lot of money in terms of the public systems that are used. And for every $10 invested, an estimated cost savings of $22. Medicine Hat is perhaps the most famous city around, as everybody seems to know about Medicine Hat. They did, in their annual report, they provided some metrics on savings in terms of utilization of public systems, and well over 50% in some areas, but definitely a decline over a 12-month period in the use of public systems. I don't know if you can see this on that slide. It's a bit fuzzy, but there is an estimate somewhere out there that public systems cost per individual of around $60,000 to $120,000 annually, and the cost comparison provided by Medicine Hat is that providing housing with supports is estimated to cost between $13,000 to $34,000 annually. So quite a difference. When we look at these examples and the proposal that's in front of you, and we think about the spectrum of housing need out there, we know that it is absolutely across the spectrum. That we have, there is that ending homelessness portion, there's the rental housing portion, and there's also the ownership portion. We know that there are many families who would love to live in the Cowichan Valley, young couples starting out, but who can't afford to own, who would be forced to be in rental or live outside of the community. So we are talking about a spectrum of need, and we are talking about, particularly in the rental market, a great need. That supply backlog number of 750 is probably triple that. And when we talk about inadequate housing that individuals are living in, we know that there's a great need for improving our stock and providing better housing for particularly our young families. And I drew this, I clipped out this little graph or little table from the 2014 CVRD Needs Assessment Report just to illustrate what the average household can afford to buy with a 10% down payment and 30% of their gross income, so kind of an affordability scale. And you'll see that particularly lone parents, single persons really are out of the market. In some areas of the regional district, couples can afford a single detached home, but certainly that's not everywhere. And these are 2011 statistics as well, so we will have seen a change. We proposed a second component of the contribution service that involves planning, research, development, and prevention. This is not an insignificant item here. We proposed this because of the need to build capacity and to help projects succeed and leverage and get out there and to be able to leverage funding and facilitate community planning processes. We also know that we have a really important need for research, data, and policy analysis. And that doesn't sound exciting, but it's part of that foundation of being able to really make something like this succeed. And we've also proposed that there be a component in here for housing loss prevention and the building of housing first partnerships. Finally, you asked about the administration. What goes into administering a service like this, and to justify that level of funding for administration. This is an overview of all of the tasks and functions that need to go into administering. We estimate that this particular component would take one full-time equivalent position, plus overhead and plus the continuing need for staying up to date on policy and legislation. The previous component as well, we also estimate one full-time equivalent position is required for that. I hope that I've answered all of your questions about that proposal. I do know that there was an additional question around what are the tax implications of that, and I understand that staff have done some work around that, and I'll leave that for staff to address. Cowichan Association is primed and prepared to go out this year and to do the work along with our coalition members to prepare for a contribution service. The coalition currently is working on its development, and it will be working on its key implementation plans. We have also proposed a regional attainable housing strategy action plan be developed. Cowichan Housing Association has applied for a small grant in aid from the CVRD. We do need to do more fundraising for that. As you know, we exist partially on seed funding that was provided via Island Health through the CVRD for homeless prevention and affordable housing. We've been very judicious about the use of those funds, and we've actually leveraged those funds one-to-one so far. Our hope is to make them last another couple of years and continue to leverage those. Excuse me. So our next step is to get out there, do community consultation and engagement, as well as to engage communities in input in terms of priorities. And we leave the decision on this to you. Our hope is that you will elect to move forward with this contribution service.
Thank you very much, Terry. And this is for direction, and we will take, if there are questions for Terry and staff, I guess would be Bev. So we have Director Jackson first. Director Jackson?
Thank you very much. I am personally in favor of this, so I hope it flies. I have a couple of questions. You were speaking initially about setting regional priorities and meeting regional priorities, and I was wondering who would be setting those priorities? That's my first question.
The priorities would be set through the process of developing those regional plans and action plans, working with a coalition that is representative of communities around the region and working with the regional district itself. This would be a regional district function, and therefore it's really important that we're all working together and making those decisions together.
Okay, thank you. If I may
follow up.
The second question was from a slide that was, I think, from Medicine Hat, and it was a few slides back, which when I was going through the material, I noted with interest, how the percentage of, hospital visits and ER visits and so forth dropped fairly significantly. But the last two, which was policing and courts, went up marginally. Was there a reason for that?
Very often in the short term, particularly in terms of criminal justice, when the system becomes more responsive, and when the system is more engaged in assisting individuals instead of incarcerating or implementing punitive members, those numbers can go up. The analogy I like to use is that when initially when RCMP and justice systems became very responsive to the issue of domestic violence, statistics actually showed an increase. Yeah.
Director Morrison.
Thank you for your presentation. Got a couple of questions. I think I'll go with the second one first. The slide on planning, research, development, and prevention, and maybe this is for Bev or Mr. Blackwell. Can you share with me how this might relate or dovetail with some of the Cowichan 2050 work, and how we might be collaborating with First Nations when it comes to this bigger question?
Thank you very much for the question through the chair. The advice that we've received so far is that the Cowichan 2050 project should not deal with affordable housing because it is a very large project on its own and could potentially slow down the remainder of the important issues that Cowichan 2050 is trying to address. In terms of collaboration with First Nations, the community plan that's currently under development is being done under the auspices of the CAB. What does CAB stand for?
It's the Homelessness Partnering Strategy Community Advisory Board, and it's funded through the federal government.
Right. And it's strictly for Aboriginal people. And so
Sorry,
the
could you just repeat that into the microphone?
Okay.
Or somebody repeat
Melina,
that in
could
the
you please
microphone. So our at-home audience could hear that acronym.
It's the Community Advisory Board, and it's a body of community members that make decisions around the homelessness partnering strategy funding that comes into Duncan through the United Way.
Great. Thank you so much for clarifying that.
And it's an Aboriginal group.
Thank you.
Right. That's what I was just going to say. It's an Aboriginal group, and the Aboriginal group decided that what was needed was a more integrated approach. So we're actually, through the coalition, we're responding to an Aboriginal initiative to include Settler Society. Did I answer your question?
Follow-up, Director Morrison?
Thank you. Through you, second question. I liked some of the references that you'd made in regards to the accountability provisions. It seems like we have a lot of large dollar volume items on our agendas today, and I'm looking at the fact that you're looking ahead. You may carry over funds as part of the trust, and you want to be bringing work plans and budgets and the like to the CBRD. I'm just wondering if there's been any thought as to perhaps a check-in on a substantially large project that was going to maybe attract more than $1 million of your funding, whether or not there would be a reason to come and check in with this board and say, you know, we didn't have this identified in our plan when we presented our business plan, but we have a $10 million project that we're looking at doing and reporting back. Has consideration been given for that?
I think that any plan needs to be a living document, and every plan has to be nimble. It has to have the ability to be flexible and to be nimble. I would not imagine a plan coming forward that only provides for a static number of projects or types of projects, because as we know, situations change daily. So absolutely, it has to be flexible and nimble.
Director Day.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for this presentation today. It helped tick off a lot of boxes inside of my head. There's one box that isn't ticked off yet, but maybe I'll finish with that in a moment. It's my opinion that this absolutely has to come to fruition at some point in the near future. Whether this board can decide to pull it off this year and move forward, or whether it has to wait for the next board, I don't know. That's up for this group to decide. As Director Morrison mentioned, there's a lot of big items on this. We have to decide how to proceed. One of the things that I think we're concerned about is that if we put more than one referendum question out there, that we risk failing at both or more. So I'd appreciate, and I'd like to continue with more comment after that, what your opinion is, just off the cuff, how you feel about the risk of that happening.
I feel that I'm glad that there are political representatives around the table, that you're thinking about your electoral citizens. It is, I acknowledge and I respect the decision that needs to be made. On the one hand, should you go to referendum this year with more than one item on that referendum, it means that the public has to be well-informed and brought along very well to understand the benefits and the potential cost savings that their investment could realize. It means that we've got a lot of work to do in a short period of time, and we will rally our troops to do that. Should the board elect to wait and, for example, consider a non-binding question on the referendum, it continues the uncertainty in terms of, how does that roll out next year? How does that continue? Both paths have some unknowns to them. The first path means we've got a lot of work to do, and we will get out there and do our utmost to prepare the communities.
Director Day.
I'll just finish by saying that, I don't think there's been one program that's come up in my 10 years in office that hasn't required some skin in the game. That's just the way things are working nowadays. To expect a upper level of government just to swoop in and solve your problems for you, you're only going to get an unsatisfactory result, in my opinion, as far as what's needed in a specific area. And I even said at my council last night the same thing. Our small municipal council in Lake Cowichan, with a much smaller budget than anybody else and around the region, has to do something as well, whether it be put some land into trust or whatever we can do. We need skin in the game. That's the term I use. I even asked that question when community groups come with requests. I mean, what are you prepared to put into this to help it work the way you want it to be? So I just want to leave it with that thought. And the one box that hasn't been ticked off to me, and I think it's a number, and the way we like to have numbers presented at this table, is what are the estimates of cost per $100,000 that could be suggested at this time? And I realize that nothing's firm, but thank you.
I have, Bev, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. The Finance Office did the calculation for me on that this morning. With a total ask of $765,000 for the regional service, it would come out to $3.86 per 100,000 residential only.
Okay, I have Director Stone and then Director Walker. Director Stone.
If I may, I just have a few comments and then a couple of questions, if I can have that latitude.
Absolutely.
I appreciate Director Day's comments because they're freshest in my mind, and I agree with a lot of them. Some of the questions that I had were answered by previous speakers in discussion, but I'm not sure that we can wait on this. We need the service to be established to access the funding that's out there, and there is a bold and motivated group, both provincially and federally, to provide the housing investments that are needed. If we're not there, we may miss out on these opportunities, and nothing's guaranteed in the world of politics, neither for us or our provincial or federal partners. I would say that in some ways, we don't know what may happen 2 years from now, and if we miss the opportunity to get in on this, it could be something that we regret in the long run. We've had, Ladysmith has lagged both Cowichan and Nanaimo over the last several years in terms of real estate, in terms of housing. We had a pretty accessible market for rentals up until the last couple of years. And so dramatically and so quickly, the assessment values, the real estate values, and the rental market has completely evaporated to the point where we are losing those young families and seniors. We've had people sell their homes looking to downsize in Ladysmith and actually had to move to the northern part of the island to find somewhere that they could stay on Vancouver Island. Not because they couldn't afford to buy, but there was no inventory there for them that was smaller and more affordable that would allow to support them through their retirement. And I also would note that the speculative real estate tax scheme that's come forward in the budget does not apply to the CVRD. And if we don't believe that there's going to be more pressure, upward pressure on the market here because of that, I think it would be a mistake. With both Nanaimo and the Capital Regional District having that tax in place, that speculative investment is now going to come our way, I strongly believe. So that's an opinion, but I do believe that there's some merit to that opinion. I appreciate that you answered some of the questions around, you know, leveraging the multiplier of other funding sources to make these. And some of the other questions I had. So the question I actually did have was, do you know what the Cowichan or Comox Valley Regional District budget is for their housing service each year?
Yeah, we can look it up precisely. The tax requisition, they stated a little bit different, so we'll have to do some zeros here, but 0.0152% per year per $1,000 of assessed value. So if we times that by 10 to make it comparable, it would come up to $1, but by 100, it would come up to $1.52 per 100,000 there. What was the other part?
That was it. I was looking at total budget number, but the per 100,000 kind of works as well. And then I guess the last question I had was just to think on the volume of work there. I see that this is going to be a lot of work. I'm supposing that there's still going to be a big volunteer contributor to it, because the amount of work that's there, I was just wondering administratively through the planning, research, development, prevention, and through the administration side, is 2 full-time employees going to be enough? I just think of the reporting requirements or offer of reporting back to the board, the strategic planning, the work planning, and I presume that there's a lot of volunteers out there that will supplement those 2 full-time employees, and we're forever grateful to them. But do you think that that's really enough to be able to support the function?
The first item on this list here is partnership and capacity building. And so, yes to volunteer, but absolutely one of our main purposes are to leverage. As I mentioned, Cowichan Housing Association has been able to leverage the money that we have received one-to-one. So over the course of a few years, we've leveraged over $300,000. That $138,000 is going to allow us to leverage more money and hopefully to have 2 full-time positions. I would also call upon our partners to speak to the initiatives that they're working on. We dovetail a lot of what we do. So for example, just as we're thinking about community consultation and engagement going forward, Social Planning Cowichan is at this particular moment madly writing a grant proposal so that they can partner with us to do that, and so that we can achieve our common aims together. If I might also, mention the volunteer aspect, and I allude to this story quite often. Last summer, we had a brief opportunity to purchase a piece of property that we intended for youth housing. Within 3 weeks, we had private investors, we had roofers, construction workers, we had a local physician come forward and say, I have $22,000, let's put out a challenge. We had a huge list of people who were willing to volunteer and put in their time to actually create this housing. The opportunity was lost because we didn't have the seed funding and we couldn't go forward without conditions. So I'm greatly optimistic about the potential for volunteer and leveraging.
I have Director Walker, Marsh, and Davis, I think. Davis, did you have your hand up? No. Director? Okay.
Thank you. I find this pretty exciting. But can you tell me how you're tying into places like North Cowichan that's taken some initiative, and how it's going to be correlated throughout the region, because Ladysmith or North Cowichan or Duncan may have their own initiatives, and how does this all work out?
That's the coordination piece. Because this is a regional initiative, and because it's really important for it to be regional, we start out by taking a regional view and garnering regional involvement so that we have all of those voices at the table. When we do our statistical analyses, we look at the CVRD as a whole, but we also know that each and every area has its own unique circumstances. The city of Duncan is vastly different from the town of Lake Cowichan and North Cowichan. But it does tie in, it will tie in, and that's the coordination piece.
Okay, Director Marsh.
Thank you. I think you all know that I'm very supportive of this, and I've been thinking about, well, first of all, I just wanted to share that if Cowichan was a village of 100 people, we know through the work of Social Planning Cowichan that 26 of those people spend more than 30% of their income on their basic housing needs, shelter, food, etc. And also, there's only one person in that village of 100 that has an income greater than 125,000, and there are 30 who have an income less than 30,000. So clearly, our population is in need of affordable places to live, and we know through the work of Abraham Maslow that you can't even begin to function or in a good way if you don't have your basic needs of food and shelter met. And we also know anecdotally, often because people don't want to come forward to out there, that there's a lot of people precariously housed. And you know, when I first heard that term, I thought that meant merely, I don't know how long I can stay there. But as I've worked at local tables and sat in on the conversations, I've realized that some people don't mention the mistreatment that they receive from landlords or roommates, and they swallow in order to have a place for their children to sleep or themselves to sleep. I'm reminded of, if we were to leverage and get some building here, how that would help not only people who are not currently adequately housed, but the people who would be building that housing and the businesses that would benefit from that. So I think that's an important part of economic development. And I wanted to say, because I've heard a few people say many times since I've sat at a decision-making table that there's only one taxpayer. And it seems to me that this is a time that we want to advocate for our 82,000 only one taxpayers, because some communities are going to benefit from the billions of dollars that federal government and provincial government are going to give. And all of our taxpayers have contributed to that money. So if it takes them, if they come to understand through our really able education that one way they could actually get some of that tax dollar back to their community in the form of actually this kind of security is to take this small amount. And, you know, people say, well, you know, everything adds up. And it's true, everything adds up. And I was looking at my assessment this year, and I couldn't believe it. The assessed value of my home has gone up 43% since 2014. So generally, I think people look at that and go either, oh, wow, windfall, or, oh, my God, am I going to pay more taxes? But I think about it as, well, who could afford to buy that if they were starting out? And gosh, you know, I'm getting of a certain age. One of these days I'm going to sell it. I certainly don't begrudge $386 for that 100,000, because I've made a bounty on my initial investment. When I first got into the market, it was a $47,000 ask. It was a matter of pay rent, buy your house. It was a no-brainer. But we know now that young people who, back in the day when I got started, I think it was in the 70s, 76, took the average young couple 5 years to earn enough money for a down payment. And we know in 2015, it took the average young couple 23 years to make a down payment on a house, a down payment, you know, and then you're looking at 20 or 30 years to pay for it. So I really hope that we do go forward. Based on the results of the survey, which included asking if our citizens support affordable housing, I really think that the responsible thing to do is ask. I know there's a risk, But I have confidence in the educated, silent majority of our community. I have confidence that they're going to understand when they're, given the information, the importance, and I believe that they're going to stand by it. So I would be supportive of asking them. Water, air, and a place to lay your head, and food, those are critical for survival. So that's my position, and I thank you for listening.
Director Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree with Directors Stone and Marsh, and it would be up to the next board to decide how much tax, although I think we need to give them the chance to do that. In addition to the Cowichan Housing Association's $10,000 grant request, I've been looking over the regional grants in aid, and there's one for $50,000 from the House of Friendship Society for a feasibility study for a new mixed-use affordable housing project focusing on mothers and infants. And this is, the feasibility study is required to leverage provincial BC Housing and federal CMHC funding. So would that be something that you would be, I guess, coordinating with the other local societies?
That's an example of coordination, yes, and in fact, we're currently working with that group to do whatever we can to move that process forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. It did clear up a lot of things for myself as well. And I'm definitely in support of your initiatives and the work that you're doing. And I think the people of Area B are also in support of just by talking to them. And I'm with Director Marsh. If I'm wondering if this is an opportunity that we could be thinking about just an AAP at this time instead of muddying the waters with a referendum. So wondering if this would be a time to initiate that. We could do it in the summer or talk about doing it after the election. Am I getting some looks? Maybe I can get an answer to that.
In general, the summer AAPs are, I'm speaking out of turn here, are usually not popular, but we've changed our policy. And also the summertime is not a good time for people that are away and vacationing, so that's generally, but
So how about spring?
I'll look to my fellow colleagues here. I have Director Stone.
I would agree with the sentiment, though, of what she's saying. I think that it's a difficult thing to communicate to people and the critical nature of it. Being able to move forward on something like this improves the lives of every single person that lives in the region. When you take people out of precarious housing, if you put people that, the young families that we all want to attract to help drive our economy as we move forward. Director Marsh made comments about how it drives economic development. All those things are very real and they're proven. The risk of and the challenge of communicating the depth of detail that you really need to communicate around this is what scares me the most. Because I think anyone in this region, the vast majority, and I would challenge that it would be the very vast majority, if they understood the full impacts of having a supportive, affordable housing opportunities in the region, how it would better the lives of everybody at every part of the financial spectrum, whatever their burden is. Whether you access that affordable housing or not, it improves the everyday lives of people and improves our communities everywhere. The more you see affordable housing, the more you see support for that transition from homelessness to independence, to keep young families in a place where their children can go to school, not be hungry, not be in a precarious housing situation. Focus on those things produces better young adults, produces better young people that it can help drive our region forward. So I just want to say that I absolutely support the sentiment behind it. I know that based on timing, it's challenging. If you wanted to do an AAP on it, it should be done much sooner than June or July. And is there enough time between now and then to do that communication that would be required? It may be just a challenge of timing. But that comes to the last question that I had, was around that public relations workload. We know that we're already tasked. We've seen it around the watershed. We've been working on this watershed, water protection service discussion for over a year, and it's still been a challenge to get the word out and the real depth of understanding around the importance of it to those who aren't engaged and initiated every single day, aren't watching us, aren't, you know, volunteering in these efforts. So my concern is more around making sure that we give it the best opportunity to succeed, because I'm fully committed to the concept. So we have limited capacity here. I think we recognize that with our staff, especially with the you know, some changes in as we move forward around our public relations and communications workload. So how much can you guys bear of that challenge to be able to communicate that? And is that appropriate from the board and staff's position to have a third party trying to communicate the intricacies of developing a new service? Yes, we can rely on our partners to talk about the need, but when it comes down to those finer details of how it actually impacts somebody's tax burden, do we have the ability to communicate that or partner with them to support them in that way, that we can feel good about that information, vet it, approve it, and say, go forth and conquer the challenge that's ahead of you guys? So I guess that's directed towards staff and to the group. Is there a way we can collaborate on that heavy lifting when it comes to communications?
Our CAO that would like to speak to that, and we do have our corporate secretary on the actual timelines of an AAP, if that is, if somebody would like to know that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair, I'll address two issues. One is, I think absolutely we would have the capacity. We were clear with the board earlier in the year that there was a fairly aggressive desire to move forward on a couple of services, and if the board chose to move forward, that we would have to apply the necessary resources to do the community outreach and the education necessary for the electorate to make an informed decision when they got to the ballot in October. So we would have to employ assistance in terms of a third party to come forward and help us with that strategy and also help us with the delivery of that. But it will be critical that the partners are also there to speak to the issues and to assist the public in understanding the breadth, not only the housing, the watershed. These are serious issues, and the communication is a challenge. But we've seen in our work that we've done this month in reaching out to the community that when we have those one-on-one conversations with people, we have an opportunity to have them more informed and understand what it is that's trying to be accomplished. So I'm not concerned that if the board moves forward, provided that an adequate budget is provided, that we would be able to undertake those communication efforts. With respect to the questions around AAP, I would recommend to the committee that you have staff report back to you in March with regard to your options around electoral approval, details around the tax rate per 100,000 of this proposed service, those kinds of details that you're going to need to make a decision to move forward, and we can certainly do that for the March meeting. In short, we've missed the timeline for an AAP if it was to be done this year prior to the election.
March
just
14th.
Given the
Just some clarification on that. In your package on UB3, the Grant and Aid Service, I have an attachment called 2018 Timelines for Seeking Public Approval. You have missed the spring AAP. That timeline's out. If you wanted to have a summer AAP, and the date I chose was first 3 readings of a bylaw on March 14th, you would then go through a 2-month community engagement process as per your policy. Statutory newspaper ads would go in May 30th, June 6th. So the AAP would actually run early June to early August. The board would consider adopting the bylaw on August 22 if public approval was obtained. If public approval was just over the 10% and requested a referendum, you could tie in the referendum on October 20th. So you still have some time. Like, I picked the date March 14. If you chose to go with a AAP and you went with first 3 readings, let's say the end of March, maybe even early April, you would just push it back into August.
So going back to what I was saying earlier, we will provide that to you in a more detailed report so that you can see the comparison to a referendum versus an AAP and make an informed decision around moving that forward, if the committee so desires.
Just while we're on this subject, I'll just say the other thing in the chart was, if you want to go direct to referendum, you have to give the bylaw first 3 readings at the latest June 13. And that doesn't allow any changes from the province. So you're better, if you're going to go that way, earlier. But like Mr. Carruthers said, that'll come back at a future meeting.
Okay, we're getting some pointers here. Director Day and then Director Acton.
I just want to make a comment about the public engagement. As I've been doing my homework on this and looking at the people sitting out there and knowing some of them quite well, I have no doubt in my mind that they will be committed to being a part of the public consultation, so that part is not a worry for me, and that's been actually one of the key things that's given me confidence moving forward this year.
Director Acton, then Morrison.
It was my understanding an AAP was 6 weeks, but you're the pro.
Madam Chair, through to Director Acton, that was under the old AAP that we threw out that process.
Okay.
So there's a new process, and it takes 2 months of community engagement before the 2-month AAP elector response time.
Right. I just wanted to say that timing, whether it's early, I don't think it's as complex issue as the water proposal. Everybody, like Director Marsh has made her comment about having a connection somehow with homelessness or affordable housing. I think it applies to everyone, and it's not conceptual or something that's not affecting all communities.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you. I eagerly anticipate the report coming forward, but would just remind everyone that that this type of proposal is not insignificant. It's a very important initiative, and I'm just hearing the voices of the community members around their thoughts on AAPs, and I wouldn't want to be in a position where I would be not supporting an initiative like this because we're obtaining elector consent via AAP as opposed to a referendum question. So just consider the magnitude of what's being proposed here, and I look forward to the report that will be provided. Thank you.
So the direction, Director Stone.
So my question was, that report giving us that option on this service will come back to us in time to actually make that motion to move forward with an AAP or a referendum? So I just heard you speak to it, but I don't see any resolution for that. It says for direction here. So do you need that direction to prepare that report?
I would appreciate that direction. I'm going to defer to Mr. Barry in terms of, we've missed the timeline for a spring AAP. I'll get you to remind us of the deadline for the summer.
So it's actually how I've written it here. The first day you can give first 3 readings is March the 14th. The reason there's more time on that one is because if the AAP, the number of people who oppose it is just over 10%, you can choose to go to referendum if you want. So you want to tie that in. It has to happen within 80 days of the elector response date. So you could go end of March, perhaps even early April. All that will do is push the end of the AAP later into August, early September.
And if that timeline applies, we could still move to referendum if the AAP were to fail?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have 2 more speakers, Director Kuhn and Director Marcotte.
Given the negative baggage that's attached to an AAP, and that still is attached to that, I would strongly advise to avoid an AAP. Also, there's another reason why I'm opposed to that. Should the AAP fail, and we go after that to a referendum, that is almost like telling the public, well, you know, your opinion doesn't really count that much. We'll try it another way. And that makes it look even worse. I mean, if you go on AAP, then you better stick with the AAP. And if it falls through, well, that's the end of that. But to then go after that to a referendum, I think that's a very bad way of going. I would avoid the AEP at any price. I would just go through referendum.
Director Marcotte.
Thank you. I too have a great amount of concerns on an AAP process. I'm probably the poster child for AAPs. Certainly the members of my community are not impressed by that. They don't feel there's a democratic way of doing things. So I have a lot of concerns about that, and I'm not.
I know there is still a lot of baggage with the old AAP.
Yes, but it is.
This is a new policy with more information, but.
I understand
Okay.
that, but
Okay.
it still doesn't make it right.
Okay.
I
Okay.
have some
Thank you.
very great concerns about that. And the timing to have it in through the summer when we're not having all the people, this is not an ideal way to show democracy. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Director Marsh.
Yeah, it was my understanding that we were talking about a report so that we could discuss whether or not and if or when to do which thing after the staff report. So I'd like to make that motion because there's a lot of important things on the agenda.
It's been moved and seconded. Any question on the motion? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on now to where am I? R7. Report from Assistant Manager of Finance.
Yes, Madam Chair, and this is regarding the draft 2018 Cowichan Valley Regional Hospital District budget. And there is a recommendation in front of you that it be recommended to the Cowichan Valley Regional Hospital District Board that the 2018 Cowichan Valley Regional Hospital District budget as presented be forwarded to the Hospital Board for consideration. Number two, that up to $5,220,000 in expenditures be approved as the hospital district's contribution to the capital cost of building a new hospice facility with funds to come from the Capital Reserve Fund. And number three, that $2,960,000 of unallocated contingency funds be used to cover the hospital district's 40% share of the 2018 major capital projects.
It's been moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Marsh. Is there any questions on this recommendation? Director Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question of finance, of how much is left in the capital fund.
Mr. Kieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So right now, the balance that you have set aside is 38.1 million. So that's what your balance is. That includes 3.3 that was spent for the land that you've already purchased.
Thank you.
Director Morrison.
Thank you. Question through to Mr. Kieber. So we've been, has this got the increased amount to 8 million in the recommendation?
It has the increase of 1 million up to 8, yes.
Up to 8 million. So specifically around that question, the preliminary figures and the plan that we've had to this point has been based on the initial very high level estimates as to cost, and just in having a discussion with Mr. Kieber before the meeting, it's anticipated that there will be a need for not only a greater down payment, but additional resources to fund whatever borrowing costs that we will have in the future. And I get the concept of starting to bump up the amounts that we save and also have available to us for the ongoing payments when the hospital is built. But my challenge is that we have approved in the regular budget significant increases. We've had to take care of some IT things. The burden to the taxpayer in this year is increased, and I'm reluctant to support a resolution. All the rest of this I'm fine with, but I think that you know, it's all going to appear on the same tax bill, and I think that holding steady for the 2018 budget year at 7 million is prudent because we've already gone to our taxpayers with what we've approved in our regular budget. And I could see us getting to this. The hospital's not going to be built for a period of time yet. I don't want to guesstimate as to how long, but I think that it would be appropriate to change the funding plan and go to an $8 million amount for savings next year and not in 2018.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, the recommendation that's before us. I'm gonna, oh, Director Kuhn, are you gonna call the question? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Going back now to R1.
Yes, Madam Chair. Staff report from the Senior Environmental Analyst, Energy, regarding Asset Management 2018 Budget Amendment. And there's a recommendation that it be recommended to the Board that the 2018 budget for Function 280 Regional Parks be amended to increase transfer from federal conditional grants by $33,435 and increase consulting services by $33,345. Two, the second part, that the 2018 budget for Function 520 Solid Waste Management Complex be amended to increase transfer from federal conditional grant revenue by $11,015 and increase asset management expenses by $11,015. Three, that the 2018 budget for Function 571 Asset Management be amended to increase transfer from federal conditional grant revenue by $141,000, increase transfer from provincial conditional grant revenue by $15,000, increase training expenses by $4,500, increase consulting services by $141,500, and increase wages by $10,000. And number four, that Function 280 Regional Parks, Function 520 Solid Waste Management Complex, and Function 571 Asset Management 2018 budget amendments be authorized to proceed prior to approval of the 2018 budget amendment.
Been moved and seconded, or it's been moved?
I have a question.
Okay, it's been moved, second, okay, and it's now on the floor, and Director Acton.
I just have a question about the process here. Is this just 2017 rolling over to 2018? I was unclear about this.
Yes. Austin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is
Yes.
some grant funding that came in late in 2017, and some of the expenses were claimed for some 2017 work, and the majority of it will be spent in 2018.
Director Davis? Director Walker, did you have a question?
No, just moving it.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff for getting all those grants from FCM and everybody else, so good job.
Thank you.
Great work. Okay, gotta call the, Director Kuhn.
Yes, I'm just curious, the increasing consulting services by 141,000, what is that?
That is, that's going to be for, there's two components to the asset management planning process this year. One is defining levels of service, and the other is climate vulnerability assessment of some of our infrastructure assets. So for the levels of service, the RFP just closed yesterday, so we had 3 proposals in from some consultants to kind of define and standardize how we talk about the levels of service provided by some of our assets. And then the climate vulnerability assessment is doing a standardized risk analysis against some of our engineering infrastructure assets primarily.
Okay, seeing Director Lefebvre?
Just to be clear, you're talking about the cost of personnel to do that work.
The consulting, or the fees, the grant is going to pay the consultant to do that.
I think
do that work.
perhaps that's what Director Kuhn was looking for.
No, that's, just curious.
Okay, I'm gonna call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on now to R2.
R2, a report from the Senior Environmental Technologist Recycling and Waste Management regarding short-term borrowing for 2018 solid waste management budget. Recommendation, 2 parts, that it be recommended to the board that short-term borrowing of up to $175,000 be approved for purchase of a replacement loader at the Bings Creek Solid Waste Management Complex to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement section 175 of the Community Charter. Number 2, that short-term borrowing of up to $50,000 be approved for the purchase of a pickup truck for solid waste operations to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement section 175 of the Community Charter.
It's been moved. Second. Any questions on this one? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on now to R3.
A report from the Manager Economic Development regarding tourism operating reserve request, and there's a recommendation that it be recommended to the board that the Tourism Cowichan Society be provided $15,888 from the Tourism Operating Reserve for destination marketing activities. Number 2, that Function 123 Regional Tourism 2018 budget be amended to increase transfer from operating reserve by $15,888 and increase grant to organization by $15,888. And 3, that Function 123 Regional Tourism 2018 budget amendments be authorized to proceed prior to approval of the 2018 budget amendment.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any questions on this one? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. I just heard that we need a little bit of a break now. It's 5 to 11. I overheard that one. So we will come back to R4, 5 minutes break. Thank you. Because it really only gives us 3.
to think about. There's so much activity in that hub down there, so I surely hope this is not connected.
Mr. Crothers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is in some ways related to the previous item that you just dealt with regard to strategic or social government, as Mr. Jeffrey referred to, the rebates that we is the social benefit of some enterprises in the community. And it's new and it's emerging, and it's something that the founding municipalities that have started this initiative are wanting to look into, and I have talked with Mr. Jeffrey. There is some benefit for us to be involved in that, particularly from the beginning, because that's where these kinds of ideas come from, in terms of local governments pooling the resources together, looking at alternative ways of doing business. In the regional district becoming involved as a founding member of this initiative.
Director Dory.
Maybe that's a bad idea.
So what happened with Kingsview when it came up?
There was kind of a split right down the middle. Move ahead, have a little more time to just understand the logic of the phased development agreement, and